Hello everyone, thanks for joining me again. It's Lisa O'Brien here and I have another tutorial for you today. I'm going to be painting a jacaranda tree. I'm not sure if you have them in your part of the world, but we have them here in Australia, and this time of the year they're in full bloom. They're beautiful. So let me know in the comments if you know what a jacaranda tree is, if you have them, and let's be creative and get painting. So hello everyone, I hope you can hear me well. I've got a bit of noise happening in the background, but I'm having problems with the microphone, so bear with me. Today I'm going to talk about, as I said earlier, jacaranda trees. We have them here in Australia. I don't know too much about them other than they are absolutely beautiful. They have a delicate green leaf for most of the year, and then from about September, October, into our warmer months, they just lose all their leaves and turn into this beautiful lavender purple colour, with all of the foliage being replaced by a full tree of flowers. And basically the structure of the tree is they get quite large and they have multiple branches coming off. And when they're in flower, you get this literally a carpet of purple underneath on the grass with the shadows and everything. It's just really quite spectacular. So the way that I draw a tree is I will give it structure at its base. So that means I will draw up the trunk as I see it, and mainly the larger branches or the stems, the trunk if the trunk splits, until the foliage begins. And then when the foliage starts, usually you don't see You'll see interrupted branches. You don't see the uninterrupted big full branches. So I start breaking my lines up to match that, and I'll just have little indications of sections of the branches and here and there, and that gives me kind of the size or the overall general shape of the tree that I want to paint. Now what I'm going to do is, just by wetting these trunk areas and the larger branches that I've drawn in, I'm letting the water run into where the pencil is. You can see from the picture that these have a very dark bark, and I'm just layering that in just to give myself and for your visual an indication of where that heaviness is. The light's coming from over here on the left, by the way. And my order of painting trees is this. No matter what the tree is, I'll always do this if I can, because I find it really sets me up to do the foliage in a much freer way, which for me, that's where my happy place is. In watercolor, I want to do it as loosely and as freely as I can. So I guess this is my prep for drawing. And with the trees, I find you don't need a lot of drawing. I'm not trying to capture every little bit of every branch or twig. I'm just painting an indication of it, and then down the track, if I choose, I will definitely go into further detail and paint specific branches or areas where there's gaps in the foliage, etc. But just to hit the road and begin, I like to keep it a little looser and more suggestive with the shapes. So order can be a big problem for beginners as well. Like, it's just knowing what should I do now, what shouldn't I paint yet. So this is a good thing just to remember, you know, the certain order is helpful. Now I've got 3 purples here. This one is straight out of my Derwent Intense palette. Purple, it's hard to see, but there it is. And that's directly put in just with some water. So it's quite a strong purple, as you can see there. Now that purple is a little bit too blue for a jacaranda flower. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of the magenta to it. Adding magenta because purple sits in between phthalo blue, primary blue, and magenta. So you can see how adding the magenta is actually making it look like a pinker purple. I'll add a little bit more. Yep. So now we're getting into that colour. And so what I'll do is I'll add that magenta into my middle intensity colour as well, which is the same but just has less water. And then I'll put more water into my lightest one. So I've literally got 3 tones of the purple. So to begin with, I really just want wet on dry, and I'm going to focus my lighter leaves, or flowers, pardon me, flowers, in the areas where the sun is shining, which is coming well, the sun's shining everywhere, but the sun's coming from the top left. So that's where I'll focus most of my lighter flowers. Not all of them though, because we need to give this tree volume, which is roundness, which means there could be branches right over here that are sticking out, coming towards us, and they're going to hit the sunlight as well. So even though they're on typically the shadier side of the tree, they're still finding direct sunlight, which means they'll be washed out and really bright and light. Anywhere where there's a gap, I will leave the gap if there's space. You can see in the picture there's quite a few gaps of blue sky. I chose not to put a blue sky in as well. But of course, if you were running a blue sky, you would be very aware of that, and I would have painted some blue in these areas before I put all my flowers in. And then I would specifically draw in the shapes of the gaps and paint the blue in around them. So I'm putting in my light areas. I'm just using a rigger brush or a liner brush, which has typically very long bristles and is a round shaped brush. And I'm rolling it. If you can see that, I'm rolling it in my fingers so that it gives me a variety of marks. I'm not repeating the exact same mark over and over, although your brain will find a way to give you a repeated shape most of the time when you're doing a repeated action. Now this is typical of me, I haven't made up enough colour, so I'll just pinch a bit, add heaps more water. I've got a habit of always testing my colours out. That's from years ago with my work and as an architectural illustrator. So I find it's very handy still with my watercolour paintings to always test out your colour, because you don't want a huge colour change now as in the first part of your painting if you run out of colour and then you change it to a totally different one, or makes it just a little bit more hard work, less fun. I'm adding a little bit of a curved shape here, which is sort of arching upwards and to the left, and that is actually going to help me emphasize the fact that the sun's coming from this side, and so that the sun is hitting all of those leaves that are on the top of a cluster of flowers, and to the left of the cluster of flowers as well. Okay, I'll kind of leave it at that. I may come back later and fill in some more highlight areas. It's important to have disassociated little dots of indicative shapes of flowers as well. This helps give your tree a looseness and a freeness that if you do everything really fixed, you won't have. My tree's a little bit crooked, so I'm just going to add a bit more out here, out this way. Okay, colour number 2. I'm not travelling over the top of all of my lighter bits, but you can see that I am overlapping a few of them. And where I am, I'm coming into the bottom of them, not the top left side, but the bottom right side. And this is increasing the believability that the sun is coming from this side, because everywhere it's getting a bit darker is on the underside. Now, areas where I've been impatient and it's too wet have turned all over quite dark. So what I will have to do is come back and pull some of that out. Handy cotton tip, and I can literally pull that back and go, no, I want some brightness there, and I want some brightness here. It's important to do that while the paint is still wet. So when you paint with watercolour, the object obviously is to enjoy yourself and have fun while you're doing something very creative and bringing something to life. The downside is when you get in the zone of just pure enjoyment, your natural habits, if they're bad, they may kick in. So one of my bad habits is that I am an under-mixer. So needless to say, I never seem to mix enough of the colour that I need. So that's what's happening here. And mind you, I'll probably do it again. But the downside is you have to try and remix that same intensity, and that's why this is handy, because it does give you the opportunity to sort of test it out and go, yes, that's about the same intensity as what I had before. So if you tend to make patterns, a good idea is to change your brush up. I'm using a hog bristle here, which is a very wiry brush, Not great for watercolour, but it's really great for making weird shapes, especially with your foliage. And I'm rotating it and I'm using it as a stiletto, not a sand shoe. It's going to give me tizzy edges, which are natural, looks more like a whole cluster of small flowers rather than a big blob. So that's something to think about when you're doing a detailed larger tree, like I'm doing a larger tree here. Whoops, I just jumped into the wrong colour. I'll put that brush there. So this is the heavier colour I've just added into. Doesn't matter if you mix it up a little bit, but can you see every time I go into a darker colour, I'm going down underneath the last darkest colour. I wouldn't put the darks immediately straight up against the lights. You can, because you're going to get these tiny little patches of extreme contrast, but it's not ideal because the tree has an overall softness to it, and that comes from the gradation of light, shade, and then shadow with the foliage or with the flowers. So I'll go back to my intermediate colour and put a few more of those in, and perhaps areas here in the body of the tree, fewer white gaps, so I can even rub the colour in, like a real patch of colour can be rubbed on rather than having to do 1,000 tiny dots. If you're a really, really strong pattern maker, I suggest rotating the page or moving your hand and doing the strokes from a different angle. This will definitely help to deconstruct any patterns that are forming in your art. For my really dark purple, that's going to be areas where I want some really strong darks. Okay, I'll leave it at that because I'm going to go back now to the trunks and the branches. What I want to do is I want to add black directly underneath where the foliage is dark and I can see there's a branch coming out. What this does is it helps us to understand the depth in the foliage, that it's actually coming forward, the flowers are coming forward and the branches are back in underneath. So they've actually got a lack of sunlight, they've got shadow, and where the shadow is, it's very dark. So can you see how this is helping to make the eye realise that that's pulled back, that's got a lot of foliage or flowers on top of it, and it's really back in there. A bit of shadow from the foliage, from the flowers, dappled light. Normally I would add a bit of colour and not just use black on a trunk of a tree, but in this case it's not anything I'm concerned with because the hero of this is the purple and the play of colour and tone with that purple. But if you did want to add something, I would suggest perhaps a little bit of brown into the sunnier areas. For now I'm leaving it because I'm going to play with just the ground here quite quickly. And you'd think if it was the grass I would start with laying down the green, but I'm not. I'm just going to start by laying down all the purple, the flowers, literally a carpet of flowers. And I'm going to put the green in between them because this is the part where I want watercolour to just be fun. I don't need it to be a perfect and true representation of all the flowers. I want that feeling of shade and beautiful flowers and just the joy of sitting or standing underneath that tree and having that purple colour just wash over you. And I'll start popping in some green as a secondary thing. I don't need it to be little dots of purple amongst the grass. It's just going to be little dots of grass amongst the purple. Obviously, if this was not a flowering tree and it was a green, the process would be the same. So I would start off with my lightest yellowy green on top left, then I get my middle green, or two versions of a middle green, light and deeper middle green, and they go on the underside and to the right. And then as I work up and up and up and get down to my darkest green, which would be mainly on the underside of all of it, along the bottom and on the right hand side. think I'll leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed that tutorial. Let me know if you give it a try and what you found the most fun part, and leave any comments or questions down below as per usual. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing, and I really appreciate you all giving me the lovely positive feedback that I've been getting. Thank you so much and have a lovely week. Bye-bye.